Bryan and Katie, good to see you guys.
It's good to see you.
Hey, good to see you, Jimmy.
Love your house.
Yeah, isn't this nice? You like my plant?
I love it.
Well, thanks for sitting down. I know you guys are like crazy busy and you guys have got to do so much. And, you know, even back, you know, beginning of the year, you know, you guys had this song, Look to the Lamb, and we're like, hey, that's a great Easter song. Let's get that out. And so right into recording the live album in March.
I forgot about Look to the Lamb already. That was this year.
That was crazy.
And then you guys rolled right into some touring, you know, after that with the Worship Together tour. And, you know, just through that, you know, even just the summer, the fall, the album released in the summer. Katie, I know you were busy in touring in the fall. But man, like, what's life look like for you guys amidst just all the things?
Yeah, all that led into our daughter starting kindergarten, so which we just dropped her off to kindergarten so we could come do this and hang out with you for a while.
We're school parents now.
Now
it's
we're
a whole
school
new
parents.
We're loving it though.
Yeah,
it's really fun.
Absolutely.
It's been a great year. It's been a really full year. I mean, it's still October technically, but it's gone by really fast. We've got to be with a lot of friends this year on tour. And making music, which is our favorite, and in a lot of rooms just worshiping, leading worship, being led by worship. And it's just been really sweet, especially after the last couple of years. You know, I think it's like there was a lot of moments where you're like, oh, I don't take this for granted at all. This is really special. So it's been fun.
Wow.
No, I think it's thinking about this last year. You know how we have tried to do this a lot throughout our marriage, as at the beginning of the year, kind of like sit down and have some goals and have like what we want to do, what we want to see God do this year that only He can do, some of the things that we can be intentional about, some of the things that we want to see in the next few years. And the last few years, I think it's been harder for us to sit down and do those goals, just the state of everything that's been going on. And I think just where we were at in our career. But one of the things that we have talked about was just like putting ourselves in different positions and like God connect us with different people to even worship in different ways or perform in different ways. And so there has been like just opportunities that God laid out in front of us this year that felt really special and unique to what we've been doing, between doing different features that she's done or different tours and touring with different friends, and even the Jesus Culture collab album of different artists that we've had involved now this year. I think it's been really fun for us to, this has been a special year for that kind of stuff.
It's been sweet.
Yeah. And talking about just like that variety of different artists and different things. The tour you guys did in the spring, the Worship Together tour, there was a lot of artists. You guys were out. Cody Carnes was out on that tour.
Sean Curran,
Jonathan Traylor. And it was such a unique night. What was that like, you know, leading as a part of that night? I mean, you know, you guys were up there the whole time. You're like singing on each other's songs. And that's got to feel a little bit different than maybe just like what you guys normally do at a conference or something like that.
Yeah, it was really fun. It's like like Bryan said at the beginning of the year this year, for the last couple years, but especially this year, we just asked God, who are we supposed to collaborate with? We're already so inspired by so many different styles of music and worship, and outside of worship as well, and just lead us into the rooms or onto the stages or wherever that we're supposed to be and with who we're supposed to be there with. And it was different this year. We have got to lead with Cody in the past, I think, and even maybe with Carrie, but Jonathan and Sean, a lot of new like moments, special moments that, I mean, they were incredible. With some really incredible nights, really sweet nights to worship together. I mean, we got to shout out Worship Together.
Right.
It was really fun and just really tender, sweet nights, really pure, and everyone just brought what they are anointed to do, and it blended really well. I thought it was really just a God honoring, sweet presence night, and for everybody that came out, I think they could feel that, just like everybody gathering with one thing in mind, just to glorify God, and all coming with different sounds maybe or different types of songs, and but there for one purpose. And it was awesome.
It felt special because you guys were up there, I think, with each other singing together for pretty much the whole show. I mean, I guess the whole show. And that felt special and different from me versus it being, you know, like, well, this is the segment for this artist and this artist. You know, it felt more church and community, like you would actually, you know, and when you're pairing those people together, it creates these unique blends of things. And like even the songs end up taking a little bit of a different flavor because you've got all these different voices happening together.
I think you get to learn from each other in a different way when you're on stage together. And I think we love both, honestly. We love having like this little moment by ourselves, and we love collaborating and being on stage together. But there is a like certain kind of flow that you can get into when you're on stage together and you don't know what's going to happen. When you like step beyond the set list for a second, you linger for that 20 seconds, and all of us are on stage and all of us are very capable of leading a moment and kind of opening it up for like what that could look like. And for us getting to watch other friends and worship leaders and on stage in the moment, it's like, it's one thing to like be in the room or at a conference or watch their album online or listen, but to be on stage, to have your in-ears in, to kind of hear the process and watch someone else do something that you do in maybe a slightly different way, or take it into a direction, you're like, oh, I love what they just did there. Or watching that process up close is, for me, is really beautiful. And I think I feel like I can learn so much from someone else, and watching and worshiping with them and watching the way that they'll lead a room and lead a moment.
I just think it's really cool to be led by each other too. And it's like you just shake off that like routine of, sometimes I think people ask it all the time, especially for people that tour all the time, which we don't tour as much as so many people, but you've sung this song now 100 times, what's different, like how do you not get tired of it, whatever. And it's like those moments right there where we're all on stage, and like you said, it just pushes past, oh, we've done this a million times, into God's doing something in this room. How are we all going to make room? How are you going to respond? How am I going to respond? Sometimes I want, go smoother than other times. But we all cover each other.
It's like it's a little bit of the unexpected. We were talking about that.
I love that.
How much you like things to be completely scripted out versus like being okay with the surprise. But there's a lot of beauty in that, in the surprise of like, wow, I didn't expect that to go there, and that was awesome.
And that's God's nature too, right? You're like, we're not supposed to have this calculated out. And it feels right. It feels right when you just let go a little bit more. You're kind of forced to in that situation too. You're like, I'm not in charge of this whole night. I don't have to script this whole night. We try to do our best to like prepare, but ultimately like God has something planned just for this group of people in this room for 7 p.m. on a, October 23rd, whatever. And it's just for now. And so how do we get out of the way? That's one thing that's really fun about those nights, is you don't really get the luxury of just like taking over in that way. It's great.
And Katie, you rolled into the fall into the It's Time tour, which was completely different, because you're out with, all these other powerhouse women worship leaders. I mean, Tasha Cobbs Leonard, Natalie Grant. I know Taya was on part of that.
Tamala Man.
Come on, man.
Yeah, Naomi. It was super fun. I couldn't believe I was there. It was
also it was like we finished that Worship Together tour, and then Katie flew back out 6 days later to jump on that It's Time tour, which was too chaotic, but also it was crazy.
I was honored to be there, and they had already started the tour. I think they were like, I don't know, 8 or 10 stops maybe something like that. And so that was a stretch for me too, just jumping in like that, being like, I mean, honestly, just being like, what am I doing here, God? Like, how did I get here? At the same time, knowing like, okay, you put me here and I want to bring what you want to do, like whatever you want to do. I want to be a vessel for that in this space. It's out of my comfort zone. It's different than what I've done, but it was really special being with all women leading. It felt like something different. And I led without Brian, which was different for me.
I'm interested in that.
I got to be proud husband on the side, just with my camera, and just be like,
you were kind of watching from the side. Like, what did that feel like? It's like watching Katie sort of like, man.
I loved it. Honestly, I think it was funny because we've had this conversation like since we got married 14 years ago, and we immediately were on staff as worship pastors together at a small church, and then we have just led together for our whole married lives. And so we've like in the last few years have talked about like, what would that look like if we were like if either of us had this opportunity. And so we had talked about this a while ago, and so when this girls tour opportunity came out, it was like, oh, this is perfect for this. It felt like God, and it's kind of like God preparing our hearts for something like that. But for me to get out and witness this night, and I think it was honestly, it was like a very monumental moment to have these. For every night was a little bit different. Some of the girls had to jump on and off, but a lot of the nights, like 5 powerhouse women up there leading together, having their own individual moments, and then just sharing some of their stories of what God's done in their lives. It was a 3.5 hour, like, incredible night.
It was a long, fun, exciting night.
Yes.
And the women, I was so inspired. I left feeling so inspired and also so free, because it was something that I had to take a risk on. I felt like God had me step out in a little bit in my own way, but then ultimately leaving, I felt so much pleasure of God from doing that, from obeying in that way. And I walked out of that tour feeling very free, and like I almost unlocked something in myself that maybe I had buried away for a while. And so I love these women too. They're a lot of them are my friends, and I had known them beforehand, which made it that much sweeter to be on stage with them, because it just was so natural. But it was really cool. It was fun to do something that was just women too. We just haven't done anything
in
like
the
that.
same sense, just getting to, like, for her, getting to lead and just be up there with all these other women. There is like that bond that happens on stage as you're going after God together and trying to follow him and what he wants to do in a room. And I will say that night it changed every single night. And so I think the band was really good. That's part of one of, for sure, the reasons I couldn't be on stage is no way I could hang with that band.
They were phenomenal.
They were phenomenal.
They were really good.
I was like, the drummer is like Mariah Carey's main drummer. that was who the band was.
If you can paint a picture.
If you could just paint a picture, but it
was awesome.
It was beautiful because they all flowed so well, and they like all of them
I
were
started
willing.
flowing well after like 5 nights. But
but everyone was willing to take a risk, and I think that
totally.
was something that stood out. And
Well,
that's nice.
and Katie, you were sharing a little bit. We were talking about that recently, and the audience that was coming to see that, because you had all these powerhouse women on there.
Yeah.
They wanted you guys to cut loose. That's why people were there, and it was worship environment, but there was also like a level of expectation of like, man, these are all amazing singers.
Yeah.
Not just worship leaders, but these girls can sing.
Oh my gosh. Yes.
Did
live,
that-
they're even better live. I just want to put that out there. We need to put that on the record.
Well, talk about that. Like, in the way that you presented, even in that tour, did you feel like a freedom to sort of like vocally go some places that maybe you wouldn't go to, like if you're just leading a room at church or at an event or something like that?
Absolutely.
It doesn't want to make me feel bad because she's so much better than me. And I'm just
No, I think it was such a cool environment for that. And that's even what I was kind of meaning. Part of it is just by feeling more free. We've talked about it so much. We grew up listening to tons of different types of music. I definitely was influenced by gospel music growing up, and when we started making music solely together, you do everything to kind of complement each other on purpose, like subconsciously and consciously. I don't know.
Yeah.
And so when this opportunity like came up, and a couple other like collaborations and stuff I've done over the last couple of years, I was like, oh, this is sort of a different thing. And it felt really stretching because I've been comfortable with what we do together. And it felt like, oh my gosh, this is a whole different thing that I can express myself differently and just worship God differently. It would serve the room in a different way than maybe some other rooms I've led in. And it was really sweet. I don't know. It's hard to describe because I think I'm still actually figuring out what all that like unlocked in me. But yes, I felt more free to really sing differently and to lead differently and to lead different songs. We were talking about songs where maybe like we lead worship, like we lead a lot of church services, and so I would pick a lot of choruses, very familiar medleys or choruses, because that would serve a Sunday morning room at church a lot of the time. That is what people are needing in that moment, and in these nights were completely different from that.
You said like real quick, you're like, okay, we need to shift up the set list.
I called Bryan. I was on like the 3rd night or something, and he wasn't out with me the whole time either, so I called him like on the tour bus or something, and I'm like, I don't think this set feels quite right. I've done it a few times. I think I'm gonna change it. And so we did, and it was the right move, I think, for it.
Yeah. I think it just another like becoming aware again, and it's something that we all know, but to see like that God doesn't just respond to like one way that we do things. It's not like there's no formula for the way, and sometimes I think we like our like perfect little way that we always do thing in our church, or I honestly have a tendency to just get stuck in doing something the same way, and she'll
just
help
copy and paste.
Yeah, like, copy and paste, where you're like, I feel comfortable, like what you said. I feel comfortable, and I've seen God move like this before, or I know that I can hit these notes like this, and it'll sound good and feel good. Or
this melody and these notes always move the room.
Yeah,
that for me really started to mess with me. I mean, we've been having this conversation now for the last couple of years, but music is supposed to move us, worship is supposed to move us as well, and emotions are connected to the way we experience God, and I think it's a gift, honestly. But at the same time, why do we copy and paste sometimes these certain sounds, these certain chords, these certain moments? And I think it's innocent a lot of the time. It's just like God moved one time like powerfully when we were singing this song, or when we did this type of we created this type of moment, and we just try to replicate that over and over again.
God is a creative God, and he was like, I want you, like I created you to be a creative being and to keep creating and not just do one thing and then replicate.
And the risk part of it's really important, I think.
What's that John Wimber quote, that faith is spelled R-I-S-K?
Wow.
But I do think that's part of our obedience. It's part of our growth as hearing the Holy Spirit. It's like we have to continue to risk, and he will continue to bless it. Wow, that's good. And it's hard to do that sometimes. It's scary. You don't want to fail. You don't want to be like embarrassed or whatever.
You're stepping out there, but having those that are willing to risk, it's like there's a payoff a lot of times in those spaces. And sometimes you risk, and sometimes it's like, okay, that didn't go so great.
Yeah, that's still true. It's like the prophetic is like that though too,
Right.
And over the years, like trying to grow in the prophetic or praying for healing, praying for people to get healed, it's like you have to step out. And God will meet you so powerfully, but you don't realize sometimes, I haven't stepped out in a while in this. This is what I have. This is what I already know I can do. We can pull it off. It's simple, but it's like we've mastered this one area, and you stop stepping out. And I'm like, oh no, Jesus! This is a personal conviction for me because I feel like God's been talking to me about this of like, and that was just a little. I think it was honestly probably just a little taste of that was that tour where God was like, oh, see, I moved different. Like you haven't figured this out yet, and I'm asking you to step out and risk again. And it made me desire that more, not just musically or with different types of singing, but just in other ways. It definitely sparked something in me.
I think it's like the grace of God sometimes that it's like human nature that we just kind of we settle and we like plateau in different seasons of life of where we're at, and it's like he makes us uncomfortable to stir a hunger inside of us to like progress and to see more things of him. And I feel like that's a little bit, we've had this conversation. It feels like that's where we're at as like a church right now, a little bit of just, I don't know. I think there's been a lot of settings that we've been in the last couple of years where we're leading, where it feels almost like there's this uncomfortableness with like, I don't know, like are we all going to engage and go after God together, or are we going to watch someone worship kind of thing? And that like ebb and flow. And I think there is that uncomfortable feeling that God allows us to feel. It's like his grace to push us on like, okay, no, stir that hunger inside of us to see more of God.
It's like a dissatisfaction.
A dissatisfaction.
We're like, this is just not satisfying like it used to, is it? Why is that? I think God wants us to step out of this. I mean, I think some of it's childlikeness too. Yeah. It's like we feel like at some point you start to realize like, oh, I'm not coming to him in a childlike way anymore. And maybe that's because it feels riskier, or it feels like, yeah, I could embarrass myself, or I could whatever, and I want to be polished, I want to be professional, whatever. But really, I mean, there's so much scripture around like coming to him with childlikeness and what that looks like. And so I think part of that is manifested for me in worship for sure, where I'm like, oh, I never want to stray from that. Like I want to grow in excellence, but I don't want to leave childlikeness behind. I want to experience God like that, and that type of joy and that type of freedom and hunger and desperation and freedom.
Does that feeling trickle down into even like the songs that you're writing? Do you see it sort of influencing like the words you're choosing, like taking those risks, even in what you're creating?
Yeah, I think we've always been songwriters that like our songs come out of us processing life. for the most part. And I think we love writing songs. It's something that we've always loved doing. And for our first couple albums that when we first started was just, we didn't really understand the industry. We didn't know that you could go write songs with other people. We did not. None of those doors were necessarily open and available to us.
We're like, what?
And I don't know if I would I was already scared enough to show Katie my songs, let alone someone
Right.
else to sell, or my ideas. And so it was for us, I think that it was what we were experiencing was like being young and early married and being part of this young church and coming from Bethel and just like reading all these books and these history of revivals. And so out of that came these songs of like, Holy Spirit, you're welcome here, like this hunger to see God move in that room, and I see heaven, and just these declarations of things that we had seen and that we wanted to see God do. And then it kind of like, it has always progressed. That's always been like a staple for us. But going through a hard season of life, and then Praise Before My Breakthrough EP came out of, a different season. So I think for us right now, it's like, okay, feeling some of this dissatisfaction. I'm sure there will be some songs that turn into
Right.
We definitely write out of that place. And I think a lot of them are like songs of remembrance, where we can go back and see what God did or what he was speaking to us, or the revelation he gave us during that time. And it typically does flow out of our life and what he's doing in us personally. But sometimes, we definitely pray, especially writing for our church. We definitely pray, like, what does the church need to hear? Sometimes it's bigger than just us and our story.
Absolutely.
But I think that's we're writing again. And I think there's an element, the childlikeness kind of comes into play too with writing, in the sense of like, if anything, we probably have a tendency to over complicate things, where God is like, it's simple. And we overdo it sometimes, just being like, how much can we fit? How much of the language, of the description of the story can we fit? And God's like, I only need one word. Like, I don't really need you to do all that. You're doing the most. And you're like, oh God, okay, I thought, and there's been some times, for me at least, where I've felt like convicted almost about that, where I'm like, do I need to sound important? Like, is this about me like expressing myself? Like, or is there something that God wants to say that's actually just simple? Like, and then there's a reason why we sing the scriptures too. There's a reason why we sing like even word for word some of those exact, like verbatim, like Psalms or whatever it is, to declare together. And so we're in the writing season right now again, and this is where we start. We definitely typically get really stirred up for something, and kind of almost like just, I think dissatisfied is the right word, probably. Dissatisfaction.
And I think it's just been the way that God has spoken to us a lot over the years. It's just through us processing what we feel like we're supposed to say through music, and sometimes there's plenty of songs that we've written that have just been for us, that like haven't seen the light of a microphone.
They're in a Dropbox.
They're in a Dropbox folder somewhere. But there is, I definitely, it sparks for us conversation with different writers, with each other. It sparks like just one line that she'll sing out, our song "Wouldn't It Be Like You," that was from a few years ago. She sang out, "Wouldn't it be like you to be different than we thought, different than we want, but better." And that was like a one statement that she sang out, and in a totally, we were sitting at the piano, and it sparked a conversation, and all of a sudden it was like, it led us to write a whole album about the Gospels. And it was kind of in that the 2020 2021 season of life, and we found ourselves like stuck in the Gospels. The Chosen had just also come out. There was so much in our life that was like, we need to hunker down and like deep dive into the Gospels, and a lot of it came from
dissatisfaction. I was going to say, we were frustrated. We're like, man, everybody says, this is who Jesus is, this is what he likes, this is whatever. And we're like, man, we got to go back to the Gospels, and what does the Bible say? Because it does become so easy and tempting to like make Jesus in your likeness and what you like and your preferences. And Jesus likes this kind of worship. He likes, he would stop for this person, but not for this person. He would whatever. And so that song, "Wouldn't It Be Like You," it started to come out of that place of like, what if we all think we haven't figured out and nobody does.
Yeah, right.
And how many times did even like people
disciples.
that lived physically in
100%.
his time, like in his time, in his day, has touched him, have hugged him, missed him completely, or tried to speak on his behalf. Peter,
Right.
like, Satan, get behind me. And he's
Yeah.
Peter, not now, you know? And it really encouraged me because I know I've done that.
Yeah.
I know I've done that. And where Jesus is like, oh, don't speak for me right now. This is not, this is in the flesh.
But his grace, like,
But his
covers
grace
that.
covers.
It's so much better.
Yes, and he's so much better than we could imagine. And I love that quote. I think is it from Bill Johnson, where like he talks about like we could never exaggerate the goodness of God.
Yeah.
Wow.
We could never over exaggerate that, and we know that he's good, and we know his nature, and we can go to the Gospels and see Jesus, the representation of the Father,
Yeah.
and how he lived and what he spoke like and what he did. And so we just got very inspired by that and started to
it's
write out of
just
that place.
an example for us of like kind of how God speaks to us in a moment of creativity, and then it causes this stirring in
Yeah.
us to like deep dive into
Right.
something and to explore, you know, the nature of God in an area
Yeah.
that we could hopefully get deep down in us enough to where it will come out in something that
The
hopefully
frustrating
impacts.
process
Yeah.
of like
Yes.
trying to craft that. Then
Yeah.
we're in that now. We'll see what comes out. We'll
Well,
see what comes out.
No guarantees.
Yes. Simple Kingdom was one of those songs for me, you know, because it just takes on that whole idea of, you know, the Beatitudes and how the kingdom is so opposite of what we often
Yeah.
see in life. you
People
know.
did not like how we said that, Jimmy.
Some
That's
people
okay.
did. No, some people
No,
really did.
because the
And some
kingdom
people-
is backwards, and I think we should
Yeah.
clear that up now. We're making a long form interview. The kingdom is the right side up, but our world that we know and live by in our, you know, reality is actually the backwards way. And,
It is
but-
backwards to the way the culture
Yes.
emphasizes things, which is what I actually love that.
I think it's in Acts when they talk about the apostles going into different cities and they turned the cities upside down because it was, and I think there is like the way that Jesus talked about things. It was like, no, my kingdom doesn't work the way that yours. And that is our
We don't
reference. Your
operate-
kingdom is backwards.
Yes, that was our reference points. And yes, the Beatitudes and the Sermon on the Mount, and we just started to go through like, what is the kingdom of God?
Yeah.
What we start to shape it as the reality that we live in, but it's not at all. And so starting to realize how simple and how beautiful and how truthful and how necessary it is to remember what that actually looks like, what we're
Yeah.
supposed to be representing here on earth and what we're supposed to be bringing to earth.
That's right. And what we're praying for, one thing I love about that whole passage is he goes, you know, through the Beatitudes, and that was earth shaking at the time. I mean, even
Yeah.
today, like, you know, if a political leader stood up and said,
Yeah.
no, this is really what society should look like, I mean, everybody'd be like, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
But then at the end of that, when he finally gets to the Lord's Prayer and he prays, your kingdom come and your will be done, the kingdom that he's asking for is the one that was described
Yeah.
back in the Beatitudes.
Yeah.
And so, you know, as worship leaders, or, you know, when we're praying that, we're singing for that and we're hoping for that, that's what we're hoping for, is that this kingdom that is so different and opposite of what we experience every day would come. And it's super challenging, but it's such a reset too, which is what I loved about Simple Kingdom. It makes you step back and say, man, like, you know, like, what am I pulling for here? You know, like, what am I striving for? And is that really the kingdom in its essence, or is this just a kingdom that I've built, you know, of seemingly good things, but all of a sudden when you look at it in light of what Jesus taught, then you're like,
Yeah. Man, it was honestly convicting. It convicted us first. That's why we wrote.
Yeah.
That's why we tried to write about some of these things.
so
Because I
good.
think, when we started to dig into it, we're like, man, it doesn't necessarily look like being right. It doesn't necessarily look like power in the way that we describe power.
Right.
It doesn't necessarily look like winning in the way that we think winning should look. It doesn't
Yes,
look like,
right.
you know, when the first shall be last and the last shall be first. Like, that really messes with you if you really try to apply that to your life. You're like, wait, what?
Go ahead, just get in front of me.
It's not easy. It's simple, but it's not easy. It's like what we talk about all the time.
Yeah.
Simple, but not easy. Childlike, but not easy. It's actually like dying to self. It's really difficult. It's really like the flesh has to be crucified.
We just went real heavy in this.
We sure
long
did.
form.
We took a
I
path
thought we were
there.
talking about songwriting, and we just went deep.
Anyway, it starts to stir within us, and that's kind of how
Yeah.
Yeah.
we start to write. And then we tried to check that all with the word, obviously, too. Not, we start to not take this too far down a path that we're like, this is our interpretation. It's a whole other interpretation of the Bible.
We have a lot of people in our lives, and Katie's dad is actually one of them. He was a pastor, and he's like very theologically sound, and we'll process a lot of our ideas with him, and be like, we're in the like, if we're stuck, we're like, help us explain this.
I remember even Simple Kingdom trying to finish out the verses and stuff. We had written probably 6 verses for that song, and trying to there was a line in that song, what was the line? Was it the 3rd verse? And I just like could not, I'm like, I can't settle on this. I feel like,
and we ended up changing
we changed the word.
The line lyric that it is now is my pride laid to rest.
Yes.
Because it was something else, like,
it just didn't feel like quite like it was saying exactly what we should be saying there. And so I remember even discussions around it, like a dinner discussion, and we're like, is that right? Like, does that feel right? And we even kind of just dug into that a little bit more, and we're like, what is it specifically are we trying to say?
Wow.
We're trying to say our pride laid to rest. Dying to self, kind of thing. But it was, a lot of those moments are important to us in the songwriting process, for sure.
Yeah. When you guys are connected, I mean, obviously we're sitting here at Jesus Culture Sacramento. Besides all the traveling you do, you guys are connected. You lead in church locally, and, just in this season, I mean, obviously COVID was like this big kind of uprooting and changing thing for a lot of churches. But, I mean, do you have a sense of maybe what God's doing through the local church, or maybe like anything that you would share, like for church leaders that are in this season, that are, they're in it every day? And what do you sense it's kind of like with the season that we're in, or what encouragement would you give to those folks?
That's good.
Something that at least initially that comes to mind is, I don't know if it's ever, we have the privilege of getting to travel a little bit and just like drop into different cities and churches and stuff like that. But I would say what we know, a lot of different worship leaders and worship pastors, but if you're sensing that kind of what we were talking about earlier in this interview, that like holy dissatisfaction of like, what is God doing in the room, and like press, I would just say like press into that more, press into that, like, God, I like, if you're not feeling hungry but you want that, like, say that simple honest prayer, God, like, put that hunger back inside of me that I had when I was younger. I think there's something about those honest prayers, those come to Jesus moments of just like help me in my unbelief, those those like biblical honest prayers that is just like, hey God, like I know I want to be hungry, but I don't feel hungry for I know I don't feel that same stirring, like, God, like, honestly, like, I pray for that you would start that in me so that I could keep going down that path and help lead my community in that same direction, in the same hunger and dissatisfaction that everyone else is feeling.
That's really good.
Hunger is definitely a huge word for me that sticks out right now. I think we were so needing, just like feeling like we needed to gather during COVID and just the stability of church and family. But I do feel like, there's something like stirring where it's just not cutting it. It's not cutting it like just our regular service. So thankful to be able to freely gather and worship, but there's something that I think God is stirring in a lot of churches as we've gone around, where it's like, it's really, I mean, for me, I feel like we get a prophetic picture a lot for the church that we're in, or the city that we're in, or sometimes outside of that, since we do get to go different places. But I think that God is just he's doing something with us desiring his presence and hosting his presence, and being willing to sacrifice everything for it. I think so. I'm still figuring out what that means to us here and what that looks like. I think sometimes it's disruptive, like in a good way, in a healthy way, and sometimes our interpretation of that's wrong. So I don't know, it's not disruptive for the sake of being disruptive, and just messing things up and just being like, this is too organized and too whatever polished. I don't think that's God's heart. But I do think sometimes, like we've been talking about, we have copy and pasted subconsciously out of maybe even gratitude or thankfulness of what God's done before in the past. And then we're trying to replicate that same thing because we're hungry. We want, that was a monumental or a very significant time where we met with the Lord. But for the new generation, and even for ourselves, we have to continue to grow
Yeah.
and to push into something new. God has something new for us. And so
that feels
yeah.
like that feels like a really timely word too. And even you talking about some of the things this year that felt risky
Yeah.
or felt different. And that feels like a word also for the time of like, it's okay to take a little bit of risk, you know. Yeah, not everything's going to always turn out exactly the way you wanted it to, but you know, maybe, you know, during the times coming out of COVID, there was a lot of fatigue where we feel like we needed, worship leaders or leaders needed to copy and paste because they just have capacity to like reinvent everything. But now we're in a season where we're in a season where it's like, okay, we're not blowing everything up, but there are risks to be taken, you know, and it's okay. It's like God's with us. If it doesn't work, we'll change something. But that feels like a real timely word of just like shaking things up, you know, being okay a little bit with the messy to really find God in the midst of it and maybe what he's doing that's unique during this season. And with this younger generation, I think they're way more okay with the messy than maybe my generation was. You know, and that feels really timely and relevant to where
it's going to put us in a uncomfortable position more than maybe someone that's younger than us. I think we've been talking about too. We're like, well, what makes it feel safe to go to church when stuff is maybe it's a little more charismatic than you're used to. Maybe it's a little bit more, you know, there are people coming in that you're like, they're not in a good place, whatever. And we were just talking about it's the presence. It's the presence of God. Because when you know that the presence is there, Jesus deals with a lot. We don't have to deal with all this ourselves. And we forget that. I think even like leading people at all, you feel like responsible for every single little thing. Someone stands up and does something or makes a scene or something. And God also can deal with that person's heart. It's not really always up to us. And I find a lot of comfort in that. I find a lot of relief in that because I so desperately want the presence of God that sometimes it is just messy. Sometimes it does just look like it's not in our control because it's not. But I would sacrifice that control for sure.
I know I forget sometimes. And it's like reminding yourself, like when Jesus talked about, it's better that I go because I'm going to send the helper. And there is like, if we could sit on that and like grasp that to another level of just like, there is something that we need as like a reliance upon the helper, upon the Spirit of God, that if we try to do so much stuff on our own and we you know, it's like Katie was saying, like God moves and then we're like, okay, that's how he does it. And it's like his grace that it's like, no, like that's how I moved in, but like I'm speaking, he is always speaking, you know, his word never returns void. You know, there is something he spoke and we have the recorded scripture, but he is continually speaking because he's continually creating because he is a God that creates. And I think there is, like as a church, a reminder of like, okay, a reliance upon the helper, upon the Spirit of God, and to like dig into that
we're
what
still
you're
processing
saying. We're processing out loud.
I think we're
in front of Jimmy.
That's such a great conversation.
It's a conversation that we're having too, because like you said, we're just feeling like, oh man, why isn't this working the same? What is it like? And I think a lot of people are feeling like
and
that.
having the boldness and the courage to try something new. I think that's the key in all of it, you know. Thank you guys so much. This conversation I feel like could go for a long time. You guys are so great.
We only hit like 2 of the points that we were going to talk about.
I'm sorry. I don't even know what all we were supposed to talk about here, but
no, but thank you guys for making the time. Man, it's been so fun to sit down and talk with you guys, and blessings to you.
So fun.
We appreciate it. Thanks for having us.
Thanks for hanging out.
Yeah.